helps others. I like to think I'm a good guy, but I'll be honest with you. There's nobody worthy of this pulpit. And I think you all have ministries that can share and be part of this. So if you have a desire to do that, please let us know. Mary, being part of the ministering council, talk to her or talk to me, and I'll take it to her. But we would love to have more participation from folks. My message today is titled A Mother Named Hannah. And as Charlie just sang, one day doesn't seem quite enough to honor and appreciate our mothers. It's not adequate. But I really want to look at a woman who impressed me as a mother, who really epitomizes what I think a mother is and should be, and the sacrifice that a mother is willing to make. I don't know how many of you know this, but Mother's Day sets the record for the most phone calls made throughout the year. Father's Day, on the other hand, sets the record for the most collect phone calls. I'm not sure what that says about us, but it's just something to be aware of. My scripture today starts in 1 Samuel 1 and goes through 1 through 8. And it's the story of Hannah. And it says, there was once a man who lived in Ramathaim, and he was descended from the old Zuph family in the Ephraim hills. And his name was Elkanah. And he was connected to Zupha and Ephraim through the father Jerob, and his father Elihu, and his great father Tohu. And he had two wives. The first was Hannah, and the second was Peninnah. And Peninnah had children, but Hannah did not. Every year this man went from his homestead up to Shiloh to worship and offer a sacrifice to God of the angel armies. Eli and his two sons, Hophni and Phinehas, served as the priest of God there. And when Elkanah sacrificed, he passed helpings from his sacrificial meal around to his wife Peninnah and all her children. But he also gave an especially generous portion to Hannah, who had loved him so much. And because God had not given her children, but her rival wife taunted her with cruelty, rubbing it in, and never letting her forget that God had not given her children. This went on for year after year, and after time she went to the sanctuary of God. She could expect to be taunted. And Hannah was reduced to tears and had no appetite. And her husband Elkanah said, "Oh, Hannah, why are you crying? Why are you eating? Why are you so upset? Am I not worth to you more than 10 sons?" Now, Hannah was a godly woman. She desperately wanted to be a mother, but for some reason that was denied of her. And it asked me the question, why doesn't God see that? Why doesn't he fix this? And I think that's a question that we ask a lot today. Why? If God loves us and he's all powerful, shouldn't he do something about our grief and our sorrows? And the reality is, we're not always given those answers. We can, in all honesty, come before God and say, God, we do not understand why one life is spared so miraculously and yet another one taken so tragically. We want the reasons. We want the logic. We want answers. We want it to make sense. But you know what? We don't always get them. God has them, but he doesn't always reveal them to us. Perhaps because we wouldn't understand, or worse, we would misunderstand and make something God that he isn't. But it is, as human beings, frustrating not to have all the answers. It is frustrating when you fervently pray and feel like God is not listening. And this was where Hannah was at. And I think these verses allow us to share in Hannah's grief a little bit and her pain. And I do believe that most of you can identify somewhat with her. Whether it's about being denied motherhood, whether it's the loss of a mother, whether it's a life struggle that you desperately want to be relieved of, but you cannot. When we look at those situations, we can feel Hannah's pain. And I think there is times when we get frustrated and we feel the pain that we start to question God. And it's oftentimes in those times where God seems to become distant to us. And it reminds me of a poem that I read, and I'm sure you've all heard it, but I want to read it again because it speaks so clearly to just what we're talking about. It's entitled Footsteps in the Stand. Excuse me, my voice is going to give me trouble today. I dreamed I was walking along the beach with the Lord, and across the sky flashed the scenes of my life. For each scene I noticed 2 sets of footprints in the sand, one belonging to me and the other to the Lord. When the last scene of the life flashed before us, I looked back at the footprints in the sand, and I noticed many times during the path of my life, there was only 1 set of footprints. I also noticed that this happened at the very lowest and saddest times of my life. This really bothered me. And I questioned the Lord about it. So, Lord, you said that once I decided to follow you, you would walk with me all the way. But I have noticed that during the most troublesome times of my life, there are only 1 set of footprints. I don't understand why in those times when I needed you the most, you should leave me. The Lord replied, my precious, precious child, I love you, and I would never, never leave you during your times of trial and suffering. When you saw only 1 set of footprints, it was then that I carried you. Too often, like Hannah, when we suffer, we don't understand. And we won't understand, perhaps, on this earth. And as I look at Hannah, she is renowned in the Jewish history as a great woman of faith. But I'll be honest with you, outside of that, she doesn't get much press. She lived in a time that was very troublesome. Judges 21:25 speaks of that. And it says, in those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in their own sight, or their own eyes. Sounds very much like today. Don't tell me what's right and wrong. I'll decide that for myself. You go your way, I'll go mine. The truth of it is, that idea is not new. And the problem with it is that at this point in time, there were people trying to follow God. Hannah was one of them. Eli, the priest, was one of them. But Eli was getting old. And he had 2 sons. And I don't think it is inaccurate or unkind to say that they were worthless. They were abusing their positions as priests. They were acting as much a sinner than any other sinner in the world. These were going to be Eli's replacements. The people weren't happy with it. Even Eli wasn't happy with it. But here they were. Eli getting older. The other situation is Hannah wanting a child desperately and not getting. Only God could bring those 2 problems together and solve them with 1 child named Samuel. Hannah's life was a very rough one. She wanted badly to be a mother, but it wasn't happening. We go on in 1 Samuel 1 to verses 9 through 11. So Hannah ate, and she pulled herself together and slipped away quietly and entered the sanctuary. And the priest Eli was on duty in the entrance of God's temple in the customary seat. Crushed in soul, Hannah prayed God and cried out inconsolably. Then she made a vow, O God of the angel armies, if you take a good, hard look at my pain, if you quit neglecting me and go into the action for me by giving me a son, I will give him completely, unreservedly to you. I will set him apart for life of holy discipline. And it so happened that as she continued to pray before God, Eli watched her closely, and Hannah was praying in her heart silently. Her lips moved, but no sound was heard. And Eli jumped to the conclusion and said she was drunk. And he approached her and said, "You're drunk. How long do you plan to keep this up? Sober up, woman." Hannah said, "Oh, no, sir. Please, I am a woman hard used. I have been drinking, not a drop of wine or beer. The only thing I have been pouring out my heart, or pouring it out for God. Don't for a minute think that I am a bad woman. It is because I am so desperately unhappy and in such pain that I have stayed here this long." Eli answered her, "Go in peace, and may the God of Israel give you what you have asked him." "Think well of me," she said, "and pray for me." And it went away. Then she ate heartily, and her face was radiant. And up before dawn, they worshiped God and returned home to Ramah. Elkanah slept with Hannah, his wife, and God began making the necessary arrangements in response to what she had asked. I love this description of Hannah. I think she would have fit right in with those early Quakers. She was a fervent prayer, and I think a good example for you and me. So is that all there is? Is that where the story ends? It'd be a sad one if it did. Samuel, her child, was going to go on to be a great prophet. And in fact, he would lead the nation of Israel until the time of King David. Verse 20 says, "Before the year was out, Hannah had conceived and given birth to a son. She named him Samuel, explaining, 'I asked God for him.' And Elkanah next took his family to the annual trip to Shiloh to worship God and offer sacrifices and keeping his vows. Hannah did not go. She told her husband, 'After the child is weaned, I'll bring him and present him before God, and there he will stay for good.'" Imagine that. The one thing you wanted more than anything. You were surrendering to God. Could you have done it? I'm not sure. Or maybe once he was around, you'd start rewriting history. I don't know about you, but I have a tendency to do that. You know, God, how I promised to do this? Well, actually, what I meant was, we'll do it this way. She might have said, "You know, God, I did say I would dedicate him, but I mean after his bar mitzvah. Or perhaps when he becomes a man and adult and goes out on his own, I'll surrender him to you." She could have. She would have in the normal situations. And the ironic part of it is, the Jewish law of the time allowed her to redeem her son from a vow for the amount of 5 shekels. Now that means nothing to you and me, but it is $1.35 in our money. For $1.35, the Jewish law would have allowed Hannah to redeem her son and keep him for life. The son she so desperately wanted. But Hannah did not redeem him. She did not renege. She took him to the temple, and Samuel grew up under Eli. And he learned from Eli how to lead Israel. He learned how to be a man of God, a prophet. As Samuel grows up, Eli's sons were killed in battle with the Philistines, and Eli himself dies. And Samuel becomes arguably the best leader that Israel ever had. The thing about Hannah's story is she cared for him constantly. Every year she would go up and visit him and bring him clothes. She prayed for him constantly. She literally sacrificed her time with her child to dedicate him to God. And you know, as a parent, it's always hard to let go. But as a parent, it's aware that we have to let go. Hannah was forced to let go at a much earlier age. And I shouldn't say the word forced because that's not accurate. She participated and allowed that to happen because she promised God. She gave up her son for the benefit of the nation. And I say that's no easy task for any mother, but essentially for Hannah. Samuel goes on, like I say, to be one of the greatest leaders Israel's ever seen. He anoints the first two kings, Saul and David. But what about Hannah? Her one and only son, she gets to see just briefly once a year. Does that seem fair? Does that seem like the kind of thing you want to hear and end the story with? Well, the Bible in Josephus tells us that Hannah went on to have 3 daughters and several sons. And I find that interesting because if you do any Old Testament reading, when you talk about the offspring, the sons are always numbered and the daughters will be considered several because of the perspective of women in that day. But in Hannah's case, it specifically says she had 3 daughters and several sons. And I wonder if that is because Hannah, being such a wonderful mother, raised those 3 daughters to be wonderful mothers themselves. If she was not such a great example, that the impact she had on her daughters was probably so much more impactful than on the sons. I just find that interesting. You know, the truth of it is, life boils down to what we know and what we don't know, and how and who we trust. Very often in my life, I have questioned God. As a young man with my father, I remember going out into a cornfield one day and screaming at God in anger. Why? Why are you allowing this to happen to me? If you're a loving God, why am I subjected to this? I didn't receive an answer in that cornfield. I turn 69 next week. I've received that answer now. God did not will that to be upon me. He does not will our hardships and our struggles and our troubles. But He does walk through us, with us, through those situations. I can honestly say that many, many times in my life, I have felt God's presence at some of the harshest and hardest times. Hannah's story is both reassuring to me and inspiring to me. Because God desires for us to trust Him like Hannah did. To literally put ourselves into His hands. When I am able to trust God, I'm able to let go of my insecurities, my doubts, my fears. So this Mother's Day, I think Hannah would challenge us. Who do you trust? She trusted God. And I think Hannah is a perfect example of what a good mother and parent looks like. Can we put our faith in God ahead of everything else in our life? Sacrificing our strongest desires to Him so that not only can He bless us, but those around us. Hannah is not only a wonderful and beautiful example of a godly mother, but also a godly servant of God. She's an example for me and hopefully for you. I think it's a wonderful thing on Mother's Day to consider what it looks like to be that kind of person, to know what Hannah had. Thank you. We're now going into a time of open worship.